David Park sat alone in his office as the clock showed 11:15 p.m. The city lights sparkled through his window, but he couldn't enjoy the view. His desk was covered with papers that told a story he didn't want to read. Bankruptcy documents, overdue bills, letters from angry investors. His company was dying, and he felt like he was dying with it. 3 years ago, everyone called him a genius. His tech company was worth $50 million. Business magazines wanted to interview him. People lined up to work for his team. Now he couldn't even pay his employees their salaries. The money had run out 2 months ago, and tomorrow he would have to tell 200 people that they no longer had jobs. David picked up a photo from his desk. It showed his whole team celebrating their first big contract. Everyone was smiling and laughing. They trusted him back then. They believed in his vision. Now he was about to destroy their lives because he had failed as a leader. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. He walked to the window and looked down at the street below. Cars moved like tiny toys and people looked like ants. From up here on the 15th floor, everything seemed small and far away. Sometimes he wished his problems could feel that distant too. But they followed him everywhere, even into his dreams. The building was empty except for security guards. Most of his employees had stopped coming to work last week when their paychecks bounced. He couldn't blame them. They had families to feed and bills to pay. Unlike him, they couldn't afford to work for free while chasing impossible dreams. David's phone buzzed with another text from his lawyer. The bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for Friday. In 4 days, everything he had built would officially disappear. His investors would get whatever scraps remained, and his employees would get nothing. The thought made his stomach turn. He remembered the early days when he started the company in his garage. He had big dreams about changing the world with technology. He wanted to create something meaningful, something that would help people. Somewhere along the way, those dreams got lost in spreadsheets and investor meetings. He started caring more about growth than purpose, more about money than meaning. His biggest mistake was not listening to the people who worked for him, especially his best programmer, a brilliant woman who had helped create their most important technology. She had tried to warn him about problems in the company. She said some people were using their technology in ways that could hurt innocent people, but he was too busy chasing profits to pay attention. When she left the company and sued him, he felt betrayed. He thought she was just being difficult. Now he understood that she was trying to protect what they had built together. Her lawsuit had cost him millions of dollars, but losing her expertise had cost him even more. She was the heart of his technical team, and when she left, everything started falling apart. David closed his eyes and tried to remember the last conversation they had. She had come to his office just like he was standing now and begged him to listen. She had discovered that one of his board members was secretly selling their technology to companies that used it for watching people without permission. She wanted him to stop it, but he was afraid of losing investors. "You have to choose," she had told him. "Do you want to make money or do you want to do the right thing?" He chose money and she walked out that day. 6 months later, she filed a lawsuit that exposed everything. The scandal destroyed his reputation and scared away his customers. Now, sitting in his empty office, David realized she had been right about everything. His company wasn't just broke, it was broken. He had lost sight of why he started it in the first place. Success had made him greedy and careless. He stopped treating his employees like people and started treating them like resources. The building felt like a tomb around him. Empty desks, dark computers, silent hallways. All the energy and excitement that once filled this place was gone. Tomorrow, when he announced the closure, it would become official. But the company had really died months ago when he stopped caring about anything except survival. David gathered the bankruptcy papers and put them in his briefcase. There was no point in staying here any longer. He had spent 3 months trying to find a miracle solution. But miracles apparently didn't come to people who had lost their way so completely. It was time to go home and figure out how to tell his wife that they were about to lose everything too. As he walked toward the elevator, he heard something strange. A sound from above like footsteps on the roof. The building should have been empty except for him and the security guards. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe the old building was making noises, but something made him pause and listen more carefully. There it was again, definitely footsteps. And was that crying? David felt a chill run down his spine. Who would be on the roof at this time of night? And why would they be crying? A terrible thought crossed his mind, and he felt his heart start racing. He ran to the security desk and checked the cameras. The monitor showed the roof, and what he saw made him freeze with horror. A young woman stood near the edge of the building. She was obviously pregnant, and she looked like she was in serious trouble. Her body language told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't up there to enjoy the view. David had never been in a situation like this before. He wasn't trained for emergencies or crisis situations. He was just a failed businessman who couldn't even save his own company. But looking at that monitor, he knew he couldn't just call security and wait. Every second might matter. He grabbed the keys to the roof access and ran for the stairs. His legs felt weak and his breathing was heavy, but he pushed himself to move faster. As he climbed, he tried to think of what he would say. How do you talk to someone who has lost all hope? What words could possibly help when someone feels like the world has no place for them? By the time he reached the roof door, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his hands were shaking. He could hear the wind whistling outside, and underneath that sound he could hear someone sobbing. David took a deep breath, turned the handle, and stepped out into the night air, not knowing that this moment would change both of their lives forever. The roof door slammed shut behind David, and the cold night air hit him like a wall. The wind was stronger up here than he had expected, and it carried the sounds of the city below, distant car horns, sirens, and the hum of traffic. But all of that faded into background noise when he saw her. She stood about 20 feet away from him, close to the edge of the building. Too close. Her dark hair whipped around her face in the wind, and even from this distance, David could see that she was shaking. Not just from the cold, but from something much deeper. Her hands were pressed against her stomach, protecting the life growing inside her. David's first instinct was to run toward her, but something told him to move slowly. He had seen enough movies to know that sudden movements might startle her. Instead, he took a careful step forward and spoke in the gentlest voice he could manage. "Hey there," he called out, just loud enough to be heard over the wind. "It's pretty cold up here tonight." The woman turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence but not fully facing him. David could see her profile now, and something about it seemed familiar. But his focus was on keeping her safe, not on solving puzzles from his past. "I know this might sound strange," David continued, taking another small step closer. "But I was just downstairs in my office, feeling pretty terrible about life. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone else who's having a rough night." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand but didn't respond. David could see that she was young, probably in her 20s, and her pregnant belly was clearly visible under her jacket. Whatever had brought her to this point must have been overwhelming. David knew that feeling all too well. "My name is David," he said, stopping about 10 feet away from her. He didn't want to get too close and make her feel trapped. "I work in this building. Well, I used to work here. Actually, I guess I still do for about 3 more days. It's complicated." For the first time, she looked directly at him. Even in the dim light from the city below, David could see her face clearly. Her eyes were red from crying, and there were dark circles underneath them that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. But there was something else about her face that made David's heart skip a beat. He knew those eyes. He had seen that expression before, though under very different circumstances. The last time he had seen this face, it had been filled with anger and disappointment instead of despair. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, and he had to steady himself against the roof's edge. "I know you," he whispered, barely audible over the wind. She stared at him for a long moment, and he watched as the same recognition dawned in her eyes. Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been irony or bitter humor. "Of all the rooftops in this city," she said, her voice hoarse from crying, "I had to pick yours." David felt like the world was spinning around him. This was the woman who had sued his company, the brilliant programmer who had tried to warn him about the corruption in his business, the employee whose departure had started the chain of events that led to his company's destruction. She was here on his building in the darkest moment of both their lives. "What are you doing here?" David asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Same thing you were probably thinking about doing when you came up here. Ending it all." She gestured toward the edge of the building. "Though I guess my situation is a little more complicated than yours." Her hand moved protectively over her stomach again, and David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. She wasn't just thinking about ending her own life. She was carrying a baby, and the weight of that responsibility was clearly crushing her. Listen, David said, his voice urgent now. I don't know what's happened to you since you left my company, but I know you're stronger than this. You were the smartest person I ever hired. You saw problems before anyone else did. You fought for what was right even when it cost you everything. Tears started flowing down her face again. Look where fighting for what's right got me, she said bitterly. Unemployed, pregnant, alone, and broke. Nobody will hire me after what happened with your company. They all think I'm a troublemaker. I spent everything I had on lawyers, and for what? Your company is still going bankrupt, and I'm worse off than when I started. David felt a crushing wave of guilt wash over him. While he had been feeling sorry for himself about losing his business, she had been fighting a much harder battle. He had at least had savings and investments to fall back on. She had risked everything to do what she thought was right, and it had destroyed her life. I'm so sorry, David said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. I should have listened to you. I should have protected you instead of fighting you. Everything that happened to my company, I deserved it. But you didn't deserve what happened to you. She looked at him with surprise. This wasn't the same man who had accused her of stealing company secrets and trying to destroy his business. This David looked broken, humbled by his failures. The anger she had carried for months seemed to drain out of her, replaced by exhaustion. Why are you up here, David? She asked quietly. Really? David thought about lying, about making up some story about checking on building security or getting fresh air. But looking at her, facing her own ultimate crisis, he couldn't bring himself to be anything but completely honest. Because I've lost everything too, he admitted. My company, my reputation, my employees' trust. Tomorrow I have to tell 200 people that they're unemployed because I failed them. I came up here because I thought maybe if I just disappeared, it would be easier for everyone. They stood there in the wind, two people who had been enemies, both brought to the same breaking point by the same series of events. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. They had spent months fighting each other in court, and now they were both standing on the same rooftop, both having lost everything they cared about. This is insane, she said, shaking her head. 6 months ago I wanted to destroy you. Now we're both up here ready to destroy ourselves. David took another step closer, and this time she didn't back away. Maybe, he said carefully, that means we're supposed to help each other instead. The wind seemed to quiet down as David moved closer. Or maybe it was just that his heartbeat was so loud he couldn't hear anything else. Now that he was only a few feet away from her, there was no doubt about who she was. Amy Chen, his former head of product development. The woman who had built the core technology that made his company successful. The same woman who had walked out of his office 18 months ago and never looked back. Amy. David said her name softly, like he was afraid saying it out loud might make her disappear. I can't believe it's really you. She turned to face him fully now, and David could see how much she had changed since the last time they spoke. The confident, determined woman who used to challenge him in meetings was gone. In her place stood someone who looked like she had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for far too long. Believe it, Amy said with a sad smile, though I probably look a little different than when you knew me. David's eyes moved to her pregnant belly, and 1,000 questions flooded his mind. When had this happened? Who was the father? How had she ended up in such a desperate situation? But he knew this wasn't the time for questions. Right now, he just needed to keep her talking and keep her safe. Tell me what happened, David said gently. After you left the company. I know we had our problems, but I never wanted things to end up like this for you. Amy let out a bitter laugh. You really want to know? Because it's not a pretty story. I want to know everything, David said, and he meant it. For the first time in months, he was thinking about someone else's pain instead of his own. Amy looked out over the city lights and began to speak. Do you remember the last day I worked for you? When I came to your office and tried to tell you about what Richards was doing? David nodded. Richards had been one of his board members, a man with connections to big investors and military contracts. You said he was selling our technology to the wrong people. He wasn't just selling it to the wrong people, David. He was selling it to governments that use surveillance technology to hunt down journalists and political protesters. Our facial recognition software, the same program I spent 2 years perfecting, was being used to identify people who spoke out against dictatorships. People were disappearing because of what we built. David felt sick to his stomach. He had known that Richards had military connections, but he had never asked too many questions about where their technology was going. He was too focused on the money coming in to worry about what happened after it left his company. I tried to show you the evidence, Amy continued. I had emails, contracts, everything. But you wouldn't listen. You said I was being paranoid and that I should trust the board to make good decisions. The memory came flooding back to David now. He remembered that meeting clearly. Amy had been upset, almost frantic, trying to explain something about their technology being misused. But he had been preparing for a huge investor presentation, and he thought she was just being overly cautious about their business partnerships. You told me to either drop it or find another job, Amy said, her voice getting stronger now. So I quit. I walked out that day thinking you would change your mind, that you would investigate and do the right thing. But you didn't. David remembered the weeks after Amy left. Her departure had created chaos in the technical team. She had been the heart of their development process, and without her, everything slowed down. Other employees started asking questions about why she had left so suddenly. Morale plummeted and productivity crashed. That's when I decided to hire lawyers, Amy continued. I thought if I couldn't stop it from the inside, maybe I could stop it from the outside. I spent every penny I had saved up to build a case against the company. I wasn't trying to get rich, David. I was trying to save people's lives. The lawsuit had been a nightmare for David's company. Amy had gathered evidence that Richards was indeed selling their technology to questionable clients. The scandal had made headlines in tech magazines. Investors pulled out. Customers canceled contracts. The company's reputation was destroyed almost overnight. But fighting you in court destroyed my life too, Amy said, her voice breaking. No other tech company would hire me. They all thought I was some kind of whistleblower who would turn on them next. I couldn't get a job anywhere. I burned through my savings paying lawyers, and when the case was finally settled, there wasn't much left. David felt ashamed as he listened to her story. While he had been angry about the lawsuit and the damage it caused to his business, he had never thought about what it was costing Amy personally. She had sacrificed her career to do what she thought was right, and it had left her with nothing. The worst part, Amy continued, was that even after all that fighting, I couldn't really stop what was happening. Richards just moved to another company and kept doing the same thing. The technology we built is still out there, still being used to hurt people, and there's nothing I can do about it. What about the baby? David asked gently. When did that happen? Amy's hand moved protectively over her stomach. About 7 months ago, I met someone, a lawyer who was helping me with the case. He seemed like a good man, someone who understood what I was fighting for. But when I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared. Just like that. Apparently, he wasn't ready for that kind of responsibility. David could see tears forming in Amy's eyes again. So here I am, she said. Unemployed, broke, pregnant, and alone. I've been living off credit cards for months, but even those are maxed out now. I got evicted from my apartment last week. I've been sleeping in my car, and yesterday it got repossessed. The full weight of Amy's situation hit David like a punch to the gut. While he had been dealing with business problems and financial losses, she had been facing homelessness and the prospect of bringing a child into a world where she couldn't even take care of herself. I came here tonight because I didn't know where else to go, Amy said. I remembered that your office was on the 15th floor, and I thought maybe if I came here it would give me the courage to do what I've been thinking about for weeks. I can't bring a baby into this mess, David. I can't be a mother when I can't even be a person. David felt his heart breaking as he listened to her words. This brilliant, principled woman who had tried to save lives and do the right thing had been pushed to the very edge of despair. And he had played a role in getting her there. Amy, David said, his voice thick with emotion, I need you to know something. Everything that happened to my company, I deserved it. But what happened to you, that's not fair. That's not right. You tried to do the right thing and the world punished you for it. Amy looked at him with surprise. This wasn't the David she remembered. The old David would have been defending his decisions and blaming her for the company's problems. This David looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely concerned about her well-being. Why are you being nice to me? Amy asked. 6 months ago you called me a traitor and a thief. David took a deep breath. Because I finally understand what you were trying to tell me, and because standing here right now, looking at what my choices have cost both of us, I realize we're not enemies. We're both victims of the same broken system. The silence between them stretched for a long moment, filled only by the sound of wind and distant traffic. David could see that Amy was shivering, not just from cold but from exhaustion and stress. Her jacket was thin, and she had been standing out here for who knows how long before he found her. "Here," David said, taking off his suit jacket. "You're freezing." Amy started to protest, but David was already wrapping the jacket around her shoulders. It was a simple gesture, but it was the first kindness anyone had shown her in months. The warmth of the fabric and the unexpected gentleness in David's voice made her start crying again. "I don't understand," Amy said through her tears. "Why are you being so different?" The David I knew would never have admitted he was wrong about anything. David sat down on a concrete ledge near the roof's edge, making sure he was far enough from the dangerous area, but close enough that Amy could join him if she wanted. "Because I've learned some things about myself that I didn't want to know," he said quietly. Amy remained standing, but she pulled his jacket tighter around herself. "What do you mean? After you left and the lawsuit started, I spent months being angry at you," David explained. "I told everyone who would listen that you were just a disgruntled employee trying to destroy the company out of spite. I convinced myself that Richards was a good man and that you were making up stories to hurt us." David paused and looked up at Amy. "But about 6 months ago, I found out the truth. And it was so much worse than anything you had told me." Amy's eyes widened. "What did you find? Remember Johnson from accounting? He came to me with a flash drive full of files. Turned out he had been tracking all the money coming in and going out of the company, and he noticed some strange patterns. Money was moving through accounts that weren't on our official books." David's voice got quieter as he continued. "I started investigating, and I discovered that Richards wasn't just selling our technology to questionable clients. He was taking huge kickbacks from those deals and hiding the money from the rest of us. He was essentially stealing from the company while putting blood on our hands." Amy felt her legs go weak. She had known Richards was corrupt, but she hadn't realized he was also stealing from David's company. "How much money are we talking about?" "Over $3 million, David said, his voice hollow. "Money that should have gone to employee bonuses, research and development, and keeping the company stable. Instead, it went into Richards's personal accounts while he sold our soul to the highest bidder." Amy slowly sat down next to David on the ledge, trying to process this information. "Did you confront him?" "I tried to," David said with a bitter laugh. "But by the time I figured it out, he had already disappeared. Moved to another country, probably living on a beach somewhere with the money he stole from us and the blood money he made selling our technology." The revelation hit Amy like a physical blow. "So while I was fighting you in court and destroying my life to expose what he was doing, he was just stealing money and planning his escape?" "Exactly," David said. "And the worst part is, if I had just listened to you from the beginning, we could have stopped him together. We could have saved the company, saved our technology from being misused, and saved your career. Instead, I was so focused on protecting what I thought was my success that I couldn't see I was being robbed blind." Amy stared out at the city lights, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "So when did you find all this out?" "About 4 months ago," David said. "Right around the time my company started really falling apart. Turns out that when you remove $3 million from a business and lose your best programmer at the same time, things go downhill pretty fast." David stood up and began pacing back and forth on the rooftop. "You want to know the really crazy part? After I discovered what Richards had done, I tried to find you. I wanted to apologize, to tell you that you had been right about everything. But my lawyers told me I couldn't contact you directly because of the lawsuit." "You tried to find me?" Amy asked with surprise. "I hired a private investigator," David admitted. "I wanted to know what had happened to you after you left the company. I needed to know if you were okay, if you had found another job, if you were happy." The investigator came back with a report that said you were unemployed and struggling financially, but he couldn't find your current address. Amy felt a strange mix of emotions. For months, she had imagined David celebrating her downfall, enjoying the fact that her stand against corruption had cost her everything. She never imagined that he had been trying to reach out to her. "Why didn't you try harder to find me?" Amy asked. David stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. "I was afraid that if I found you, I would have to face what my choices had cost you. I was afraid to admit that I had failed not just as a businessman, but as a human being." The honesty in David's voice was something Amy had never heard from him before. The David she had worked for was always confident, always sure he was making the right decisions. This David seemed broken by the weight of his mistakes. "There's something else," David said, his voice getting even quieter. "Something I've never told anyone." Amy waited for him to continue. "The night before you quit, I had a meeting with Richards and some of his clients. I didn't know at the time who these people really were, but looking back I should have asked more questions. One of them showed me photos of people who had been arrested using our facial recognition technology." David's hands were shaking now as he remembered that night. "They were proud of it, Amy. They were showing off how effective our technology was at identifying and catching troublemakers. They showed me pictures of journalists who had been arrested, activists who had disappeared, and instead of being horrified, I was impressed by how well our technology worked." Amy felt sick hearing this. She had suspected that their technology was being used to hurt people, but hearing David describe it in such detail made it real in a way it had never been before. "The next day, when you came to my office trying to warn me, I already knew what you were going to tell me," David continued. "Part of me already knew you were right, but I was in too deep. I had taken their money, made promises to investors, built my whole business plan around these contracts. I couldn't admit that everything I had built was wrong." Amy stood up and walked to the edge of the roof, looking down at the street far below. "So you chose money over doing the right thing?" "I chose money over everything," David said. "Money over ethics, money over friendship, money over the safety of innocent people. And in the end, I lost the money anyway. I lost everything anyway." Amy turned back to face him. "Do you know what happened to those people? The ones in the photos?" David nodded slowly. "Some of them are dead, Amy. Some of them just disappeared and were never seen again. Our technology helped make that happen. We built something that was supposed to help people, and instead it became a weapon." For the first time since recognizing each other on the rooftop, Amy felt something other than despair. She felt anger, but not at David. She felt angry at a world where good people like her were punished for trying to do the right thing, while people like Richards got rich and disappeared. "We both got played," Amy said finally. "You by Richards and me by a system that punishes whistleblowers more than it punishes criminals." The truth hung in the air between them like a bridge they could finally cross together. For the first time in months, Amy felt like someone actually understood what she had been going through. And David, for the first time since his company started falling apart, felt like he wasn't carrying his guilt alone. "So what happens now?" Amy asked, sitting back down on the ledge. "We've both lost everything. We're both broke. I'm about to have a baby I can't afford, and you're about to lose your company. What's the point of talking about any of this?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights. "You know what's funny?" he said finally. 6 months ago, I thought success meant having the biggest company, making the most money, impressing the most investors. Now I realize I had success right in front of me the whole time, and I threw it away." "What do you mean?" Amy asked. "I mean you," David said, looking at her directly. "You were the most talented person I ever hired. More than that, you were the most honest person I ever worked with. You saw problems before anyone else did. You cared about doing the right thing even when it was hard. You were what made my company actually worth something." Amy felt tears coming to her eyes again, but this time they weren't entirely sad tears. For so long she had felt like a failure, like someone who had destroyed her own life for nothing. Hearing David acknowledge her value meant more than she could have imagined. "But that doesn't solve our problems," Amy said. "Knowing what we know now doesn't change the fact that we're both in terrible situations." David stood up and began pacing again, but this time there was energy in his movement instead of despair. "What if it could, though? What if instead of giving up, we used what we've learned to build something better?" Amy looked at him skeptically. "David, I'm homeless and pregnant. You're about to declare bankruptcy. Neither of us has any money or any credibility left in the tech industry. What could we possibly build?" "Something honest," David said, his voice getting stronger. "Something that actually helps people instead of hurting them. Something we can be proud of." David sat back down next to Amy, and she could see excitement building in his eyes. It was the same look he used to get when he had a new idea for their old company. But this felt different somehow, more genuine. "Listen to me," David said urgently. "We both know exactly what went wrong with our old company. We know how technology can be misused, how good intentions can be corrupted by greed, how employees can be ignored when they try to speak up about problems. What if we created a company that was designed to avoid all those mistakes? Amy wanted to believe him, but everything felt too overwhelming. David, I don't even have a place to sleep tonight. I can't think about starting a company when I don't know how I'm going to survive the next week. That's exactly why this could work, David said. We've both hit rock bottom. We've both lost everything. That means we have nothing left to lose by trying something completely different. David pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. I still have about $40,000 left in my personal savings. It's not much, but it's enough to get started. We could find you a place to live, get you back on your feet, and use the rest to build something small but meaningful. Amy stared at him in disbelief. You would do that? After everything that happened between us? After I sued your company and cost you millions of dollars? Amy, you saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with, David said seriously. Your lawsuit forced me to discover the truth about Richards. Without that, I never would have known how badly I had failed as a leader. I would have kept making the same mistakes over and over again. Amy felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not just hope for herself, but hope that maybe all the pain and struggle had been leading somewhere meaningful. What kind of company are you talking about? Amy asked cautiously. David's eyes lit up as he began to explain his vision. A consulting firm that helps other tech companies avoid the mistakes we made. We could review their partnerships, audit their technology usage, make sure their products aren't being used to hurt people. We could be like ethical watchdogs for the tech industry. The idea was starting to make sense to Amy. So, instead of building technology ourselves, we would help other people build it responsibly? Exactly, David said. And we would have credibility because we've been through the worst-case scenario. We know what happens when companies lose their way. We could help other entrepreneurs avoid the same pitfalls. Amy put her hand on her belly and felt the baby moving inside her. For the first time in weeks, she started to imagine a future where her child could grow up in a world she had helped make better. What about Richards? Amy asked. What about all the damage that's already been done? David's expression grew serious. We can't undo the past, but we can make sure it doesn't keep happening. Every company we help, every technology we keep from being misused, every whistleblower we protect, that's how we make up for what happened. Amy stood up and walked to the edge of the roof again. But this time she wasn't looking down at the street below. She was looking out at the city, imagining all the companies and entrepreneurs who might be facing the same choices David had faced. You really think we could make a difference? Amy asked. I think we're the only people who can, David said, joining her at the edge. We've seen what happens when good intentions go wrong. We've lived through the consequences of choosing money over morality. Who better to help other people avoid the same mistakes? Amy was quiet for several minutes, thinking through everything David had proposed. It was risky and there were no guarantees. But for the first time since her life fell apart, she felt like she had a purpose again. Okay, Amy said finally, but I have conditions. Name them, David said immediately. First, we do this completely transparently. No hidden partnerships, no secret clients, no decisions made without both of us agreeing. Second, we never take money from anyone who won't let us review their entire operation. And third, if we ever discover a client is misusing technology, we expose them publicly even if it costs us the contract. David smiled, and Amy realized it was the first genuine smile she had seen from him all night. Those sound like exactly the right conditions, he said. And one more thing, Amy added, her hand moving to her belly again. This baby is going to grow up in a world where at least one company is committed to doing the right thing, no matter what it costs. David felt tears coming to his eyes as he realized what Amy was saying. She wasn't just agreeing to work with him. She was trusting him with her future and her child's future. What should we call the company? David asked. Amy thought for a moment, then smiled. Second chances, she said, because that's what we're both getting. As the sun began to rise over the city, David and Amy walked back toward the roof door together. Neither of them knew exactly what the future would hold, but for the first time in months they both believed it could be something good. The baby inside Amy kicked gently, as if agreeing with their decision to choose hope over despair. 6 months later, Second Chances had helped 12 companies avoid ethical disasters, and had employed 15 people who had been blacklisted from other tech jobs for speaking up about problems. Amy's daughter was born healthy and strong, and her first smile was captured in the company's waiting room. surrounded by people who understood that sometimes the most important success comes from the courage to start over.